The boarding school was shut down 20 years ago, but every morning at 7 a.m., the bell still rings. The hill was steep, and the fog seemed to thicken the higher we climbed. My friend Mason and I had heard the same story growing up about Blackridge Boarding School, closed after a fire claimed 11 students. It had been sealed ever since, the gates rusted, the halls silenced. But the villagers swore the bell still rang every morning at exactly 7 a.m., echoing down the valley like a ghost that refused to leave. We didn't believe it. Not until that Sunday morning, when the sound drifted through the mist, a slow, deep toll that made the hairs on my neck rise. So we went up. We told ourselves it was just a prank, maybe the wind moving old metal. The gates were chained, but the side wall had long since crumbled. Mason went first, flashlight in hand. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt wood and rain-soaked dust. Old desks were still arranged in rows, textbooks blackened and warped. A faint outline of writing was still visible on the chalkboard. Lesson 5, The Human Mind. Then we heard it, the faint creak of footsteps upstairs. We froze. "Mason," I whispered. He shook his head. The sound stopped. And then, from the hallway beyond the broken door, came a soft, echoing ring. Ding, ding, ding. It was 7 a.m., but the school clock on the wall was melted and dead. The sound of the bell faded, leaving behind a silence that pressed against our ears. Mason muttered that it had to be some mechanism still stuck in motion after the fire, but I could tell he didn't believe it. His voice shook slightly. We moved through the first corridor, beams of our flashlights cutting through the dust. The walls were lined with old portraits, black and white photographs of students and teachers, all framed in tarnished brass. Their faces had faded with time, except one. It was the portrait of a headmaster, his nameplate still clear. Headmaster Warren Hale, 1953 to 1982. Unlike the others, his eyes were sharp, unnervingly bright, as if painted fresh. Mason laughed nervously. "Looks like he's still watching." But when we turned to leave, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. The headmaster's mouth had changed. I blinked hard. It was subtle, but the faintest trace of a smile had appeared. We hurried on, trying to shake the unease. The next room we found was the dormitory. Rows of metal beds, each one perfectly made, sheets untouched. A faint char line marked the floor where the fire must have started. Then Mason crouched near a bed frame. "There's something carved here," he said, shining his light. Words scratched into the metal. "Don't answer the bell." The air turned colder. I could see my breath fog in front of me. And then, clear as day, a child's laughter echoed from the hallway we'd just come through. We turned back. The portraits on the wall were all crooked now, every single one tilted toward the dormitory door. And the bell began to ring again. But this time it wasn't just one tone. It sounded like multiple bells, tolling in sync, coming from somewhere deep inside the school. The sound rolled through the hallways, not like a bell tower, but like dozens of small handbells being shaken somewhere deep below us. The air vibrated with it. Mason and I pressed our hands to our ears, but even then, it seemed to hum inside our skulls. We backed away from the dormitory, trying to find the exit, but every corridor looked the same. Paint peeled from the walls. The same portraits hung crookedly, and the same faint smell of burnt paper followed us. Then we saw a door at the end of the hall, its surface blackened, its handle sealed with wax. Above it, a metal plate read, "Classroom B." Mason reached for the wax. "We can hide in here." But before he could touch it, the wax cracked on its own, splintering open with a faint hiss, like it had been waiting. The door creaked wide. Inside were rows of desks, each with an open notebook. Every page was blank except for one phrase, written over and over again. "Listen when it rings." The chalkboard had the same sentence scrawled across it, carved deep into the slate. Mason's flashlight flickered. "This is insane," he whispered. "Maybe it's some kind of art project. Some prank." Before he finished, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged white, and all around us, the notebooks began to turn their pages at once, fluttering as if caught in a silent wind. And then we heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, Heavy, deliberate. They stopped right outside the door. Through the narrow window in the wood, I saw movement, a silhouette. The figure was tall, wearing a long coat, or maybe robes. It stood perfectly still for a moment, then raised one hand and pressed it against the glass. 5 blackened fingertips smeared across the surface. The door began to rattle, and faintly, behind us, the classroom bell chimed again. But this time, it wasn't echoing through the halls. It was ringing inside the room. The ringing came from the front of the classroom, soft, rhythmic, almost gentle. Mason swung his light toward the teacher's desk, and that's when we saw it. A small brass bell, sitting perfectly upright. It trembled slightly, ringing on its own. The closer we stepped, the louder it grew, though it never moved an inch. Mason whispered, "It's vibrating." Then, as if responding, the bell stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. And then we heard whispering. It came from the back of the room, low, childlike voices murmuring in unison. My light flicked over the last row of desks and froze. 11 shadows sat there, perfectly still, shaped like children. No faces, no color, just darkness molded into human form. They stared toward the front of the room, hands folded neatly on the desks. I took a step back. "Mason, we have to go." He didn't move. His eyes were fixed on one of the desks. "There's a name carved here." He brushed away the dust. It read, Mason Hale. He turned to me, pale as chalk. "That's my name." Before I could speak, the bell rang again, sharp, clear, and final. The shadows turned their heads toward us. In perfect unison, they stood. Their feet didn't touch the ground as they began to drift forward, silent and slow. Mason stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The metal screeched across the floor, a horrible sound that echoed off the walls. The children stopped. Then, one by one, they tilted their heads to the side as if listening. Somewhere deeper in the building, another bell rang in reply, slower, deeper, more mournful. It sounded almost like a funeral toll. I grabbed Mason's arm. "We're leaving. Now." But when we turned for the door, it was gone. The hallway outside had changed, replaced by a solid wall of brick. And the voices behind us began to whisper again. Only this time, they were saying our names. We pressed our backs against the new brick wall, hearts pounding. The whispers were getting louder, layering over each other until they almost sounded like chant. Mason's name, then mine, repeated over and over in those small, breathless voices. Then silence, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Mason turned his flashlight toward the classroom again, but the shadows were gone. Every desk sat empty, every chair neatly pushed in. Only the faint shape of 11 handprints remained burned into the floor where the figures had stood. "We're trapped," Mason said, his voice shaking. "There has to be another way out." That's when I noticed a faint draft coming from behind the chalkboard. I pushed at the edge. It swung inward, revealing a narrow stone staircase spiraling up. It led toward the bell tower. We climbed carefully. The steps creaked beneath us, covered in soot and old feathers, as if birds had lived there once and burnt away. The higher we went, the more the air smelled like metal and dust. Halfway up, Mason stopped. "Do you hear that?" At first, I didn't. Then came a faint, rhythmic tapping, metal on metal, echoing from above. We reached the tower chamber. The great bell hung crooked, cracked down the center. Its clapper swung lazily, though no wind moved it. Someone had written words around the inside rim of the bell in dark, smeared paint. "When it rings, they remember." Mason approached, flashlight trembling in his hand. "Who are they?" he whispered. The answer came not from me, but from the shadows gathering at the edge of the room. Figures began to step from the corners, faint, flickering shapes of children in old uniforms, eyes hollow, skin gray as ash. The bell creaked. Then, slow and deliberate, it began to move. Dong! The sound slammed through my chest like thunder. The children smiled, and every clock in the ruined school below began to tick, in perfect rhythm, for the first time in 20 years. The bell sound didn't fade, it multiplied. Each echo felt heavier, sharper, as though the walls themselves were carrying it. Mason dropped to his knees, clutching his ears. "It's inside my head," he shouted. "Make it stop." But it wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a pulse, deep, slow, and rhythmic, vibrating through the floorboards, the stone, even the air. The children's shadows stood motionless, heads tilted back, mouths open in silent joy as the cracked bell kept swinging. I grabbed Mason's arm and pulled him toward the stairs, but when we reached the doorway, the spiral steps were gone. In their place was an endless drop, black and bottomless. The bell tolled again. I turned back toward the room and froze. The children were gone, but in their place, sitting cross-legged where they had stood, were 11 small school bags, perfectly lined in a row. Each tag bore a single name, written in fading ink. The first name read, Evelyn Carter. The last one, Mason Hale. Mason stared at it, his breathing uneven. "That's my name again." "Why?" A faint sound interrupted him, a whisper right beside my ear. "They never left, Mason." I spun around. No one there, just dust swirling in the flicker of our light. Then the bell above us groaned again, its metal splitting further. The vibration shook the floor, cracks spreading through the stone beneath our feet. "We have to jump," I shouted. "Grab the beam now." We leapt for a wooden support beam, just as the bell ripped free and crashed through the tower floor, tumbling into the darkness below. The sound that followed was deafening, a deep, hollow boom that seemed to go on forever. Then silence. The tower stopped shaking, and from the pit below came the faint echo of laughter. Children laughing, singing something soft and wordless. When I looked down, I could see faint lights glowing beneath the cracks in the stone, like tiny candles flickering far, far below. "Mason," I whispered, "I don't think this place ever stopped ringing." We crawled out through a hole in the wall of the tower, our bodies coated in dust. The corridor beyond was unfamiliar, not burned, not decayed. Everything looked intact, like time had reversed itself. The smell of smoke was gone, replaced by the faint scent of chalk and varnish. Down the hallway, lights flickered, the electric kind, steady, yellow, humming softly. Mason stared. "This can't be real," he whispered. This place was ashes. But the longer we stood there, the more alive it became. I could hear voices, faint, echoing laughter. Shoes tapping against polished floors. The sound of a bell ringing again, but now it was normal, like a school starting its morning. We turned the corner and found a door labeled Headmaster's Office. The nameplate was clean, freshly polished. Warren Hale. Mason froze. "That's my last name." Before I could stop him, he pushed the door open. Inside, sunlight spilled through tall windows. Papers were neatly stacked on the desk, and a faint radio broadcast played an old tune from decades ago. In the center of the desk sat a small, brass bell, the same one from the classroom. And behind the desk sat a man. He looked up slowly. His suit was dark and pressed, his face pale but sharp. His eyes locked on Mason. "I wonder when you come back," he said softly. Mason stammered. You know me?" The headmaster smiled faintly. "I knew your father." He tried to silence the bell. But some things don't stay buried. The bell on the desk began to vibrate, though he hadn't touched it. The air in the room tightened, every sound muted except the faint hum of metal. Mason took a step forward. "What are you talking about?" The headmaster leaned back, eyes glinting. "The fire didn't kill them, Mason. It kept them here." Outside, down the hall, the sound of the children's laughter returned, louder now, rushing toward us like a wave. The headmaster stood. "The bell calls them when it's time." Then he looked directly at me. "And you shouldn't have answered it." The headmaster's words hung in the air, heavy as smoke. Mason stumbled back, eyes wide. "You're lying," he whispered. "The fire was an accident." The man's faint smile never changed. "Accidents don't ring bells for 20 years. The walls around us began to flicker, colors shifting, paint peeling, wood blackening. The clean, well-lit office started burning away before our eyes, replaced again by the charred ruins we'd seen earlier. Only the headmaster's figure remained untouched, standing calmly amid the ghostly firelight. Flames crawled up the walls but gave no heat, only light, pale, almost colorless. The papers on the desk disintegrated into ash without burning. Mason grabbed my arm. "We have to go now." The The headmaster's voice followed as we backed toward the hall. "You can't leave until it finishes ringing." Then he vanished. The corridor was no longer bright. It was glowing red, pulsing as if the walls themselves were breathing. Children's laughter echoed through the smoke, turning into choked sobs, then back to giggles. Shadows darted along the walls, small figures, their outlines twitching unnaturally. We ran. The air was thick, turning to smoke that burned our lungs. At every corner, we found doors that led to nowhere, classrooms collapsing into black voids, stairways ending midair. Then, in a haze ahead, we saw a faint flicker, the tower's bell swinging again, though it had fallen hours ago. It hovered midair, rotating slowly as firelight poured from the crack down its center. Mason stopped, his face pale. "It's not ringing anymore," he said. But as we watched, the bell began to tilt, creaking. From inside it came whispers, hundreds of voices merging into one, a single phrase, rising and falling like a chant. "When it stops ringing, we fade." I turned to Mason. "They think the ringing keeps them alive." His eyes darted toward the bell. "Then what happens if it finally stops?" The voices answered together. "You'll stay and ring it for us." The bell trembled once, then began to swing again. The bell's swing grew faster, shaking the air with every pass. Each toll cracked through the school like thunder. With every strike, the shadows along the walls flinched and shimmered, faces forming for just a heartbeat before melting away again. Mason shouted over the noise, "We have to stop it!" He ran forward, but the closer he got, the thicker the air became, like invisible hands were pushing him back. I tried to grab him, but a sudden force threw me against the wall. My flashlight shattered. The room plunged into flickering red and black. In that light, I saw the headmaster again, no longer solid, but a wavering silhouette wrapped in smoke. His voice was everywhere at once. "The bell must ring, Mason. It's the sound that keeps us bound." Mason screamed, "You killed them. You trapped them here." The headmaster's tone turned cold. "No, I saved them. From time. From decay. From being forgotten." The bell's crack widened, glowing brighter, spilling golden embers into the air. I crawled toward Mason, but the ground beneath me felt soft, alive, shifting like it was breathing. When I looked down, I realized the floor wasn't stone anymore. It was made of faces, dozens of them, eyes open, mouths moving silently with each toll of the bell. One of them looked like Mason. He froze, staring down. That's me." And then his reflection, his double, opened its eyes and whispered something I'll never forget. "You already stayed." The headmaster raised his hand, and the bell lifted higher, its glow spilling through every crack in the building. "The school needs its keeper," he said softly. "It's been waiting for one." Before I could move, the ground split apart. Mason screamed as a burst of white fire wrapped around him, pulling him toward the bell. His body turned translucent, his outline flickering like smoke. And then silence. The bell stopped ringing. The entire building shuddered. From the cracks in the walls, black ash began to pour, drifting upward, not down. The headmaster turned to me, his voice barely audible. "It's your turn now." Everything went still. The air was thick and colorless, and the once blazing tower stood quiet. The bell hung in the air, motionless, glowing faintly from within, like a dying ember. "Mason," I whispered. No answer, only the faint creak of wood cooling after fire. The place that moments ago had screamed and groaned was now silent, emptied of sound. Even my footsteps made no echo. Then, from behind me, a soft tap. I turned slowly. Mason stood there, or something that looked like him. His skin was pale gray, his eyes hollow but faintly glowing from within. His voice was faint, distant, layered with whispers, like 100 voices speaking through him. "It doesn't end," he said. "Someone has to keep it ringing." He reached toward the bell, fingers trembling. "Mason, stop!" I shouted. "You can fight it." He looked at me with something like sadness. "If it stops, they vanish. All of them. The ones who burned. The ones who waited." The bell gave a faint metallic groan. The glow inside it began to fade. And in that moment, the air filled with desperate cries, children's voices pleading, begging not to be forgotten. Their shadows fluttered across the walls like trapped birds. Mason looked back at me once more. "I can hear them," he whispered. "They're so scared." Then he stepped forward and touched the bell. The entire tower exploded with sound. One single, deafening toll that split the air open. The light swallowed everything. When I woke, it was daylight. The school was gone. Only blackened stones and wild grass remained. My watch said 7 a.m. I walked down to the village in shock, desperate for answers. But the streets were different. The cars, the signs, even the people. A man at the corner stared when I asked about Blackridge Boarding School. He frowned. That place, it burned down 40 years ago. No one's been up there since. I froze. 40? He nodded. Why? You look like you've seen a ghost. I turned toward the hill. The wind blew faintly through the trees. And from far, far away, the sound came again. Ding, ding. It was 7 a.m., and the bell still rang.